When I heard a wolf's howl in the silence of the forest, my breath caught, because I understood. It was not by accident. I was walking alone, late afternoon, snow packing under my boots, the kind that squeaks when the air is so cold it stings the skin inside your nose. I know these woods. I've walked them since I was young, and now I'm past 50, with knees that remind me of every hill I've climbed. I don't scare easy. I don't jump at shadows. But that howl, deep, long, not the rough chorus of a pack, went through me like a hand around the heart. At first, I told myself it was the usual thing. Wolves talk. They announce where they are. They answer. It's winter and sound travels, that's all. I stood still anyway. The trees were the tall, quiet kind, black lines in the white afternoon, and the sky was fading to steel. My breath smoked in front of me. I listened. The forest has a hum, even in silence, a low note under everything. The howl cut that note clean in two. It didn't sound like a threat. It didn't sound like a claim. It sounded like a call, not a call to the pack, a call to me. That thought made me laugh out loud, a dry, embarrassed sound that died right away in the cold. I shifted my pack, rubbed my hands, and checked the wind. The snow was fresh enough to show a line if I found it, and I had maybe an hour of decent light left. I told myself to keep moving, mind my route, head back to the truck before dark. I told myself a lot of sensible things. My legs didn't listen. They stayed planted like the roots under me, waiting for something I couldn't name. Then the howl came again, closer, not far, 10 breaths, maybe 20. I could feel it in my ribs. The sound had shape, like a hand on my shoulder turning me to face a certain way. I looked where it pointed me, down the slope, across a small gully, into a tangle of young spruce where the snow drifted deep. I knew there was a game trail cut through there, narrow and half hidden. I'd taken it in autumn when the leaves were down and the berries were gone. In winter, that trail would be tight, silent, too easy to lose. I knew that. And still, I stepped toward it. My head was arguing the whole time. Don't follow a wolf. Don't be stupid. You've got no business pushing into a thicket when the light's going. Your knee will give out and you'll be stuck. This is weather that doesn't forgive mistakes. Turn back. Make a fire. Count your blessings and get home. But there was another voice, not in my head exactly, more like in my chest, the place where the cold and the sound met. It said, "Go." I stopped at the edge of the gully and tested the crust with my pole. It held, then broke, and I went down to my thigh in powder. Cold hit my skin through the gap at my boot and shot straight to bone. I swore under my breath, hauled myself out, and stood panting, looking at my own clumsy hole in the snow like it could answer for me. I should have turned around right there. That would have been the smart story, the normal one. Old man hears a wolf, gets spooked, heads home with a cold sock and a good tale for the stove. I decided that it was just my nerves and started to turn back, but the howl sounded again, closer than before, and there was something in it I could not ignore. It wasn't loud this time. It was tight, like a whistle passed through teeth. A plea, almost. My heart did a slow roll, and for a second the trees seemed to lean in, listening with me. "All right," I said, to no one, to the cold, to the wolf. "All right." I crossed the gully, slow and careful, feeling the snow break and hold, break and hold. On the far side, the game trail showed itself as a faint dip, a belt cinched around the waist of the hill. A few fir needles lay on the snow like green commas. I followed the dip into the spruce. The branches pushed back. Snow fell off in soft puffs onto my hat and collar. The light dimmed to a greenish gray, and the sound of my own breath grew loud in my ears. I kept waiting for the wolf to bolt, to flash through the trees and vanish, leaving me with only my foolishness and the evening. Instead, I saw him. He was up the trail a dozen paces, standing broadside, head turned toward me. His coat was a winter mix, ash, smoke, old straw, with a darker saddle and a pale mask around the eyes. He was big, the way a river feels big when you stand close to it. Not fat, built. He didn't bare his teeth, he didn't flatten his ears. He watched me like a man watches a man he recognizes and can't place. I don't pretend to read wolves. I've seen them enough to know they are their own country. But his look made something settle in me. It wasn't fear. It was a kind of recognition I couldn't explain. My hands stopped shaking. My breathing smoothed. I took one step. He didn't move. I took another. He flicked an ear toward the right, toward a darker seam in the trees, and then he turned and went that way at a trot that was more like a thought than a motion, easy, silent, certain. "Wait," I heard myself say, which was ridiculous, and yet he did. He glanced back, not stopping, just checking that I was coming. It felt the way it feels when a friend holds the door for you without looking, trusting you'll be there. Snow slid into my boots again. A branch snapped under me. In the narrow places, I put my hands on the trunks and pushed myself through, feeling bark under my gloves, the rough truth of it. Every now and then, the wolf would lift his head, and I'd catch the line of his nose pointing, the way a good dog points a bird, only this wasn't a bird, and he wasn't my dog. He was leading, and I was following like that was the most natural thing in the world. The forest changed in small ways that felt like signs. The wind fell off as if we'd stepped behind a curtain. The cold sharpened, the kind that tells you water is near, and stopped. Somewhere ahead, under the snow, I knew there'd be a low place, a seep or a creek, the kind that can trick you into thinking the ice is thick when it's thin as a window. I took shorter steps. The wolf slowed too, ears forward, body long, tail level. He looked back once more, and I swear the message came through as clear as speech. "Follow me, and I will show you the truth." I should say it plain. The wolf seemed to speak. "Follow me, and I will show you the truth." I don't know how long we went like that. Time in a winter woods is a strange thing. It stretches and tightens. It moves like breath. But every step I took made the feeling stronger that I wasn't wandering. I was being brought, like a hand on the small of my back guiding me through a crowd. My fear came and went in waves. Fear of the cold, fear of a misstep, fear of being a fool, and then something bigger would wash over it. Gratitude, maybe, or awe, like standing under a night sky with no town lights and realizing how much space there is above you. The trail bent, and the wolf stopped. He stood very still, one paw lifted, listening. I listened too. At first, all I heard was the thud of my heart. Then the forest opened a hush I had not noticed before. In that hush, far ahead and thin as thread, there was a sound that didn't belong to wind or bird or branch. It was a sound like a small sob, smothered by the snow. I followed the dip of the trail into the darker part of the spruce, and the snow turned soft and deep, swallowing my boots to the ankle. My breath sounded too loud, a saw cutting through quiet. I kept my eyes low for sign, anything that might tell me I wasn't chasing a sound my own mind had stretched. I told myself I'd go a little farther, find a marker I knew, and turn back before the light died. I told myself I was being careful, sensible, measured. I thought it would end in nothing and I'd laugh about it later by the stove. But the track showed itself. Clean, fresh, perfect in the powder. 2 front prints set narrow and straight, the back prints landing almost in the same holes. Not a dog. Too long, too neat. Wolf. I crouched, the cold biting my knees, and put my glove beside one print. Big, not monstrous, but big in the way that says born to move. The edges were sharp, the snow still had that shine to it, the kind that goes dull if you wait even a minute. He'd passed here just now. That tightened something in my chest and loosened it at the same time. I stood and looked down the corridor of trees, and then I saw him. He was just a shape at first, a gray seam between trunks. Then he slid one step into a patch of open light And there he was, whole. Broad chest, narrow waist, the winter coat rough over fine muscle. He didn't crouch, he didn't lift his lip, he just stood and looked at me the way you look at a person you know, trying to remember where from. I froze with one boot half lifted, like I'd stepped into a photograph. He turned his head a little, and our eyes met. People say all kinds of things about that, about what you can read in a wild eye. I don't put much stock in that kind of talk. But the feeling that hit me then was not fear and not challenge. It was recognition, plain as a hand on the shoulder. He looked at me like I was his own. My heart stumbled in my chest. I don't know what he saw, an old man with snow in his beard and a knee that clicks, but whatever it was, it didn't make him run. He held my gaze a beat longer than made sense for a wild thing, then flicked his ear and shifted his weight like a guide, impatient with a slow student. I took one step, then another. He eased backward, not fleeing, just measuring the space between us like a man keeps a lane on ice. He wanted the distance, but not the break. "What are you doing?" I whispered, and the words smoked and vanished. He had already slipped behind a spruce, a soft fold in the air. I hurried forward, careful, tapping the snow ahead with my pole in the places that looked flat, and lied about it. His prints read like a sentence across the page. Where the ground dipped, he lengthened. Where branches lay heavy, he lowered his head and threaded the needles. I mirrored him without thinking, as if my body remembered a lesson it had not learned. I came to the place where he had stood and looked back at me. The smell of him hung there, clean and wild, a cold iron scent under the resin. It shook me more than I care to admit. I hadn't planned for my own reaction. I was fine with distance and theory. The realness of him, the fact of him, it settled my doubts and raised new ones all at once. A jay screamed twice from somewhere high, and I flinched and laughed at myself for it. The light thinned another shade toward evening. I should have marked a turn. I should have stopped to take stock. I should have said, "Enough. Go home while you still can see the color of your own hands." I thought he was only toying with me, leading me nowhere until the daylight died. But the track pulled me on, firm as a rope. He had not zigzagged to confuse me. He had not circled to throw me off. He had gone true, like a river finding its bed. I followed, and the spruce began to thin, giving way to a stand of birch, pale trunks like bones rising out of the snow. The sound under the quiet changed. It was so faint I could have missed it if my whole body weren't tuned to listen. A hush, different from wind. A kind of held breath in the land itself. The wolf flashed again ahead, crossing a patch of white between birches. He glanced over his shoulder, just that, and in that look there was no threat and no fear. It was a check, the way a man looks to see if his partner is still with him on a dark road. I lifted my hand, palm open without thinking, and said, "I'm here." He vanished again, and the birch stand took him in. I lost the track for a heartbeat, where the wind had brushed the surface clean, and panic rose quick and bright, the way it does when you misplace something that matters too much. I turned twice, found my own scuffed prints, and steadied myself with the pole. Then, a little downhill, the line picked up again, clear as writing. Relief came hot and foolish. I smiled into the cold like a simpleton and said, "All right," as if he could hear and care. The ground sloped toward a low place. The birch stopped as if cut, and the world turned to hummocks and shadow. I knew this kind of ground. Frozen springs, hidden cuts, ice that breaks in a ring and drops you to your hip in black water. I took shorter steps and tested with the pole. The wolf had gone light over it, barely dimpling the crust. He made it look easy because it was easy for him. For me, every step had a question mark at the end. A branch popped behind me, snow settling, loud enough to make me turn fast and regret it as my knee pinched. I stood still until the ache dulled. For a moment, doubt swept through. The clean, practical kind that says you're too old, this is too far, the cold is too sharp, and there's no sense in following a wild thing into a trap of your own making. I felt the edge of that doubt, like the edge of a knife against the pad of a finger. I would have listened to it too. I would have turned around and picked my own prints back through the spruce and told myself a story later that made sense, but the track kept going, straight as an arrow laid on a map, and I could not make my feet stop. Something in me had already taken the first step and locked in. It wasn't pride, it wasn't stubbornness, it was that feeling from before, the one that settled and loosened at the same time, the one that comes when you know you've been chosen for a task and you don't know the shape of it yet. The wind stirred, and I heard it again. Thin, fragile, far off, but real. Not the wolf, not the trees, a sound that didn't belong to snow or ice at all. I couldn't name it, not yet. I only knew it pulled the line inside me tighter. I eased forward, eyes on the next print, and the next. The light was running out. The cold was climbing my sleeves. He had gone ahead. He would be there, or he wouldn't. Either way, the track was a promise I had already accepted. The forest sank into a deeper shade of gray, as if the day itself were slipping under ice. Snow thickened from sift to pour, a steady fall that made the air grainy and close. The trees pressed in tighter, their branches stooping with fresh weight. Sounds began to appear where there had been only silence, a dull tapping from somewhere you couldn't point to, a faint creak like wood breathing, the soft hiss of flakes finding needles. I knew this turn in the weather. It makes edges vanish, trails that seem certain become guesses wrapped in white. I paused to listen for my own sense of direction and found it frayed. The landmarks I trust in winter, broken snag like a crooked finger, lichen dark boulder, the kink in the ridgeline, blurred behind the falling snow. Fear rose quick and clean, the kind that tastes metallic, telling me plainly, this is how men get lost. I moved my jaw to keep it from locking. I told myself to mark every choice, to put a sign in my head for the way back. It didn't change the simple truth that the world had gone blank around me. Then the wolf howled again. It came sharper this time. Not the far bell-like calling of range to range, but near, shaped, aimed. It carried a tremor I didn't hear before, an edge like a thread pulled tight. It was not warning and not celebration. It was worry. It was request. My chest tightened around it, the way you brace when someone says your name in a voice you recognize from trouble. I turned to face the sound, and the snowfall thickened between us, like a curtain being drawn and parted at the same time. "All right," I whispered, more to steady myself than to answer him. I kept moving along the track he'd left me, and the strange noises of the forest fell into place, as if the howl had retuned my hearing. A woodpecker somewhere, but slow, irregular, more likely a loose branch knocking, a warning about wind. The creak was a trunk laying weight on a frozen root. The hiss was the snow itself, which had its own quiet voice if you've listened long enough. I did the hard arithmetic that winter always asks. If I lose him, if the light fails, if the snow deepens and the wind comes up, can I turn around and make home? The numbers weren't friendly. I felt the pull to quit, to step back into the last certainty and hold there. But the thought of dropping the line we'd made between us shook me worse than the fear. I can't explain that without sounding foolish. My mind said one thing. My feet, my ribs, whatever part of a man still belongs to the animal world, they said the other. And I've learned the forest punishes a man for ignoring the simple truths inside his body. It wasn't a hunt. I knew that now. I know the look of a chase, the rhythm of it, drive, angle, press, burst. This had none of that. This was a steady draw, as if he were laying out a path he wanted me to see, not to spring a trap, but to bring me somewhere he couldn't leave. A gust pressed the snow sideways and opened the slope ahead. He was there, on the rise. Nothing grand, just a low hump where the trees let the hill breathe. He stood broadside at the crest, the pale hair along his ribs stirred by the wind, one forepaw lifted as if he were listening through the ground. He looked down at me, and the space between us went quiet. The fall of snow softened, and in the hush my own breath sounded like a bellows. The fear didn't leave. It sat beside something else that had grown larger than it. Trust, uninvited, undeniable. "I see you," I said. He tipped his head, not the cute tilt of a dog, but a thin angle, reading me. I took a step. He held. Another step. He backed one pace, not in retreat, but like a guide keeping the distance he prefers. Then he turned and slipped off the blind side of the rise. I climbed after him, thigh burning where the crust gave and dumped me to the knee. The top was bare of snow in a few places, wind scoured to a dark skin of ground, and the smell there, earth and iron and resin, came strong as coffee. Beyond, the land dropped into a shallow bowl of shadow. The trees were younger there, their stems tight, and the snow lay over them in quilts and folds, a mother's tuck. The wind didn't reach into that bowl. The world sounded padded. I thought he was just taking me to his pack, that this was the point and the trick, that I'd crest the rise and see yellow eyes like lanterns set in the brush and my frame would go cold with realization. But when I stepped closer, the howl came again, shorter, tighter, the tremor now a plain break in the voice. And underneath it I heard something I had missed before, something human-shaped. It might have been only a whisper of it, a suggestion, but it hit me like a blow. My hands were shaking because I felt it wasn't about me, but about someone else. I went still to listen harder. The snow fell straight again, barely marking the air. The bowl held its silence like cupped hands, and inside those hands there was a thin, swallowed sound, the kind you'd miss if your blood was loud or your mind was talking over it. It came and went. It did not belong to wind or tree or bird. It belonged to a small body trying not to be cold. The wolf's track angled down the inside of the bowl, careful around hummocks, circling deadfall instead of leaping it, conserving energy not for himself, but for me, as if he'd thought about each place my old legs could follow. That realization knocked me a step back in my own skin. He wasn't just going, he was guiding. I tested the first descent with my pole and felt the crust crack to slush under. I shifted sideways, planting my edges as if I still had the balance I owned in my 30s. The wolf waited near a low, storm-downed spruce whose crown lay spread like a broken umbrella. He looked back once more, and I saw no wild brightness there, no fever of prey. I saw urgency. I saw a question, "Can you come?" "Yes," I said, though no one had asked me out loud. "Yes, I can." The thought of his pack faded and then felt silly, like a story told by a man who needs a reason for what he knows. This wasn't a lure. This was a pull toward a point I couldn't see yet. The snow tapped once on the brim of my hat. The strange noises of the forest seemed to lean out of the way to clear a lane for the real sound, the small, thin one, where fear and life meet and call for help. I took the next step down into the bowl, and then the next, every footfall a promise I couldn't break now, not to myself, not to him, not to whoever waited in that padded quiet. The tangle of downed timber closed over the trail like a fist, limbs crisscrossed at every angle, bark torn and gray where storms had snapped them. Snow poured into the gap so the ground looked solid where it wasn't. I lifted my knee high to clear a trunk and felt the drag in the joint, the kind that warns you to slow down. The bowl held the weather in a hush, and then the wind shouldered through a seam and hissed across the needles. In that hiss, thin as thread, I heard it again, a small sound that didn't belong to trees. I stopped and stripped off one glove so I could hear better, because fingers know what ears won't, and I cupped my hand to my good ear. The wind faded, and between its breaths there came a tiny, smothered whimper. It was not the wolf. It was not any bird. It reached straight into the soft part under my ribs. My heart slid sideways and then began to hammer, a slow, heavy beat like it wanted to shove me forward. The wolf stood 10 paces off, half-shadowed by a blown-over spruce. He didn't crouch. He didn't threaten. He faced me square, and the set of his body said, clear as words, "Here." He glanced to his left toward a snarl of branches packed with snow, then back to me, and the look in his eyes was not wildfire, more like a question, a push. The hair on my arms rose despite the cold. "All right," I told him, though my mouth had gone dry. "Show me." The wind came again, dragging a skin of blown snow low across the ground, and the cry rode it, a small, broken sob, then silence. I started picking a path through the timber, testing each step with the pole, easing my weight onto the next patch of crust, listening for hollow places that would dump me hip deep. My breath went loud in my ears. Each time the wind eased, I held still and listened. Each time the sound came back, too faint to trust and too real to deny. "Hold on," I said, "because that's what you say, even when you don't know if anyone can hear." The wolf moved when I moved, staying level with me, then slightly ahead, never close enough to crowd, never far enough to lose. When a branch blocked my chest, he slid around it as if to mark the hole I should use. When I hesitated at a drift that looked wrong, he paused and looked back until I chose another line. It was like following a man who knows the map by heart and is trying to teach it without speaking. The cry came closer, not loud, but near. It had that tight-held quality of someone trying to be brave and being too small for it. My mouth filled with the taste of pennies. I knew then what my bones had already guessed. This wasn't about me. This wasn't a trick or a test. This was a call. I found the first sign not with my eyes, but with my boot. The crust collapsed under my weight, and I dropped to the shin in powder beside a pale dome shape half buried in snow. My gut clenched, and I reached down with my bare hand and brushed at it. Nylon rasped under my fingers. A small hat, blue once, now the color of wet sky, the kind with a little puffball on top, stiff with frost. I swallowed hard and brushed more. There, another scrap of color, a sleeve, a mitt that had come off. I set my pole aside and began to dig with both hands, fast and clumsy, throwing snow back over my shoulder. "Please," I said, and I don't know who I was talking to, the wolf, the trees, the wind, God. I thought the child was dead, but the snow shifted under my hands, and a tiny body twitched, and a thin, tight breath hiccuped out, a sound that cut me open. I froze a heartbeat, then scraped more, careful now, freeing the face, the nose, the mouth. The skin was pale as wax with a blush of gray. The lashes were furred with ice. I slid my palm behind the small head and lifted it into the crook of my elbow, and the weight of it was terrible, too light, too still. And then she made the weakest whimper I have ever heard. "Hey, hey," I said, voice breaking. "I've got you." My hands were shaking so hard I scared myself. I shoved my bare hand under my coat and into my armpit to warm it, then pressed that hand gentle against her cheek, my other hand covering her tiny mouth and nose to shape my breath toward her. I could feel nothing at first, then a ghost of warmth from my own body reflecting back. Her lips trembled once. I took off my hat and pulled it over her head, tugged the hood of her coat up, zipped it with numb, fumbling fingers, then wrapped my scarf around her face so only the eyes showed. She opened them. They were dark and too big for her small face, and the naked plea there hit me like a blow. There was such a plea in her eyes that I cried. I did, right there in the cold, tears hot, then freezing at the edges, a man past 50, with his face bent over a child, begging her to stay. The wolf stood 3 paces away, still as carved stone, watching, not hungry, not afraid, present. It steadied me in a way I cannot explain. I tucked her inside my coat, the way you tuck a bird to calm its panic, pressing her to the heat of my chest. She made a small sound again, not quite a cry, more a breath that caught and held and shivered. "That's it," I said. "Breathe. Stay with me." The wind shouldered through the bowl again, testing us, but its teeth felt duller now. The wolf lifted his nose, tasting the air, then looked down the line he'd come, then back at me. He didn't need to speak. The meaning was plain. Time to go. I slid my arm under her legs and shifted her weight higher against me, the ache in my shoulder a clean, welcome pain. I scooped the mitt and shoved it into my pocket, a foolish impulse to save everything that belonged to her. I took one step and almost went to my knee as the crust gave, then caught myself with the pole and stood breathing hard, shaking, grateful for the hurt because it meant I was here and warm enough to feel it. "Help me keep her warm," I told the wolf. Absurd words that felt exactly right. He turned and stepped, slow and sure, shaping a path through the tangle the way he had led me in. I looked down at the tiny dark eyes inside my coat, at the wet shimmer of frozen lashes. "I've got you," I said again, because sometimes that's the only bridge there is between one breath and the next. Her mouth moved once under the scarf. I couldn't tell if she tried to speak or if the cold was pulling at her. The wind hissed. The timber groaned. The light slid lower. We had a way out to find and no time to spare. And just then, somewhere above us, the forest made a new sound I couldn't place, and I lifted my head, holding her close, listening for what would come next. She was so cold she felt weightless, like a bundle of sticks wrapped in cloth. I tucked her deeper inside my coat until her ear rested against my sternum, and I could feel the faintest flutter of her against my heartbeat. I put my mouth near her hat and breathed warm air into the pocket my hands made around her face. My own breath came ragged and hot, then turned to frost on my collar. "Stay with me," I whispered. "Stay." I rocked once without meaning to, the way a man does when he holds something too precious and too breakable. The wolf stood close, not at my shoulder, but near enough that I could hear him pull air through his nose, testing the world. He didn't pace. He didn't flinch. He was there the way a door is there, solid, between us and whatever cold pressed in. He glanced at the torn timber, then at me, then back over the path he had cut, as if counting the miles left in a language older than mine. I slid my hand inside my coat between the child and my chest, skin to cloth, and I cupped the back of her head. The heat from me felt like nothing at first, a weak candle in a barn. Then, beneath my fingers, a tremor, the kind that says the body is trying to stoke its own fire again. She moaned once, a thin thread of sound, and my eyes burned. "That's right," I said, my voice breaking. "That's the sound I need to hear." The wind dragged itself across the bowl, slow and heavy, and the spruce sighed. A black shape dropped from the edge of the trees and settled on a snag, head cocked. Another followed, wing beats dull against the snow-laden air. Crows. They know what winter hides. One hopped lower, bold as a thief, watching. Before my fear could rise, the wolf moved, not with a lunge, but with a tight, circling sweep that pressed a boundary around us. He didn't bark. He didn't snap. He looked up once, and the crows shifted, unhappy with a rule they recognized. When the bold one hopped again, the wolf's ears went flat for a heartbeat and his lips lifted enough to show white. That was all it took. The crows rose, complaining, and took the wind to a higher branch. "Thank you," I said to a creature who owed me nothing. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. He had another pass to make, another circle to draw. He completed it, and came to stillness again, as if he had set a guard we both could trust. I ran through the small moves I knew. I loosened the child's scarf to check her mouth, then wrapped it tighter so my breath could warm the air she took in. I shifted her higher, pressing her belly to my ribs, my palm at her back, my other hand covering her ear against the wind. I talked low without words, that soft nonsense sound people make for babies and for animals and for themselves. The sound steadied me more than it did her. Then the wolf tipped his head and let a sound rise. It wasn't the proud high ribbon of a long call. It was low and even, a hum that began in the chest and ran through the spine. It filled the space between trees like smoke from a good fire. It did not frighten me. It soothed. It felt like a lullaby that knew the land better than any mother tongue. The air seemed to lean toward it. The crows quieted. My hands stopped shaking so hard, I remembered how to breathe in a way that didn't steal heat from her. "I thought you'd be gone now," I heard myself say, and I meant it. I thought the animal would vanish, his work done, the mystery complete, leaving me with the long walk and the old doubt that I had understood any of this. I thought I would turn and find only my own tracks and a night coming on too fast. But he stepped forward and looked back, then stepped again, slow, sure, like a lantern moving just ahead of me, showing the way back. That simple thing undid me, not the drama of a charge, not a wild act, only the firm choosing to go in front of us through the worst of it. I stood there with the child tucked in my coat and felt something inside me shift. I realized this wolf knew more about human life than I did. We moved. He took the narrowest lines where the crust would hold a man's weight, threading the buried hummocks and the slick skins of old ice. When a fallen branch made a trap of angles, he showed a gap and waited for me to find it. When a drift lay lying and smooth, he skirted the place where the wind had hollowed it, and I followed his marks like a blind man follows a warm hand. The child stirred, a small flutter like a bird testing a wing. I answered with my body, hugging her closer, bending my shoulders to make a tent for her face. I counted breaths without numbers, just in and out, listening for a rhythm that could belong to both of us. The wolf glanced back each time my step broke, and I grimaced. He didn't hurry me. He didn't press. He made the world fractionally easier everywhere his paws fell. At the edge of the bowl, the wind met us. It pushed, cold and certain, and the trees sang their long winter song, that hollow wooden moan that can shake a man's resolve if he lets it. I planted my pole and leaned into the slope. The crows followed a while, muttering, then gave us up for other news. The wolf's hum, a small, steady tone that barely touched the air, kept time with the slow lift and set of my feet. It was not a call to the pack. It was music for work, for carrying, for doing the next right thing. Once, the child's breath hitched and turned thin, and heat rose through me like anger at the whole sky. I stopped, pressed her cheek to the bare skin at my throat, and breathed into the space between us, slow and deep, until I felt the tiniest answering push of her against me. "There you are," I whispered, and the relief nearly dropped me to my knees. The wolf waited with one paw lifted, as if the earth itself had told him to hold, until the beat returned. We gained the rise. Beyond it, the birch opened a pale aisle. Somewhere out there, past the drifted hill and the tight spruce, there was road and wood smoke and hands warmer than mine. I set my jaw and nodded once to the wolf. He dipped his head in a motion that could have been wind or acknowledgement, then went on, a gray guide in a white world, and I followed, hearing his soft song keep us both moving toward whatever mercy was waiting in the winter light ahead. The way back fought me for every step. The snow came heavier, big flakes that clung and melted and froze again on my lashes, a slow blindfold. The wind had teeth now, not sharp, but stubborn, chewing at the edges of my coat, testing every seam. The child lay against my chest, a small heat that flickered and threatened to gutter. I tightened my arms until my shoulders burned and my forearms ached, until my fingers tingled, then went numb until I could feel the shape of her through layers like a heartbeat I had borrowed. The wolf kept the lead, not far, never out of sight long enough to become a story. He threaded the low places and took the ridges shallow where the crust would bear. Every dozen paces he'd look back, a brief cut of his eyes, and in that look I found more steadiness than in any compass. I matched my breaths to his trot, 2 for the step, 1 to hold, anything to keep a rhythm when the world wanted to break it. My knee began to argue. It set a hot wire under the kneecap and plucked it each time the crust gave, and I dropped an inch farther than I guessed. I talked to it out loud, the way you talk to an old dog who's done more than his share. "Just a little more," I said. "Just a little." The child answered with a sound that was hardly a sound at all, the faintest moan, like a door moving in a distant house. It slashed me with fear and then washed me with relief. Alive. Still alive. I bent my head until my chin touched the top of her hat and breathed into the hollow I'd made for her. The air I gave felt thin to me. I prayed it felt thick to her. The wolf slowed where the wind had carved a drift into a cornice and skimmed along its spine to the place where it rejoined the ground. I followed, step-testing with my pole, feeling for the give that would drop me into the hidden trash of branches. When I faltered, he would stop, a pale shape against the gray, and wait until my boots found his line again. The birch gave way, tree by tree, to older spruce, then to the long, even stems I knew from a younger cut. The smell changed a little, less iron, more dry bark, the memory of summer needles locked in winter air. That smell, so thin, told me we were bending toward familiar ground. I clung to it like a man clings to a half-remembered hymn. Snow tried to fill our prints even as we made them. Behind us, the world closed as if erasing a mistake. Good. Let it. I didn't need the way back anymore. I needed the way forward, the next right place to put my foot, the next pocket of firm snow that would carry both of us. The child stirred again. A breath, a catch, a soft complaint that made me want to weep. "I hear you," I whispered into her scarf. "I hear you." My voice broke and I didn't care. The wolf's ears twitched at the sound, and he glanced back, measuring not doubt but distance. We hit a patch where the wind had polished the surface to something like glass under the powder. My boot slid, the knee screamed, and I dropped to one hand to keep from falling on her. The shock blew the breath from me. I knelt there gulping like a fish, face close to the snow's skin, smelling its clean, impossible emptiness. For a heartbeat, I wanted to lie down and sleep, the oldest winter trick. The child's small weight settled heavier against me, and that wish turned to anger. At the cold, at my age, at every careless thing that leads to a day like this. I stood. The anger warmed me in an honest way. The wolf waited, one front paw lifted as if holding the earth steady for us. The trees thinned ahead. The wind's voice changed pitch, losing the bottle-necked moan of tight timber and taking on a wider sound. I knew that tone. It belongs to open ground. I pushed into it, letting it take the sweat off my neck. Between trunks I saw a band of lighter sky, a long straight seam in the forest. My heart picked up. Not the frantic run of fear, but the drumbeat of recognition. The old cut, the familiar clearing, the one that runs east to west like a scar you can see from the county road when the leaves are down. I had walked it in every season. I knew its dips and its ditch, the place where the snow drifted deep and the place where the wind scoured it down to dirt. "I think he's brought us to the cut," I said, and the sound of my own voice shook. The wolf reached the edge, paused, and looked back. He had done it. He had threaded me from the bowl to this line I could follow, even blind. I felt a dizzy rush of relief that almost dropped me again. I thought that now the animal would leave me. But he did not step off into the trees. He did not vanish into the gray, the way a wild thing should when his part is over. He waited, still as a post, until I had shifted the child higher and turned my body toward the opening. Only when my boots set on the hard-packed track at the center of the cut did he move, easing along the edge with us, half in cover, half in sight, as if he meant to patrol our flank. The wind ran freer there, but it had fewer teeth. The snow lay shallower where the open had let it blow through. I made better speed. Each step cost a little less. The child made another thin sound, and I answered with my whole chest, rocking as I walked, talking nonsense that meant stay. "Road soon," I told her, like she knew the word. "Hands and heat and lights. You hear me?" Soon the cut bent once, and then straightened toward a notch I knew. At the far end of that notch, if we were lucky and the plow had been by, there would be the county road, hard as iron. And if I had any grace left in the day, a truck passing with a heater that worked, and a driver with a phone, and hands as warm as summer. I set my jaw and forgot my knee. The wolf paced ahead, then fell back, then took the far side, a gray current in a white channel, never crossing in front of me, never crossing behind, keeping a line like a guide with a rule. We reached the last stand of trees before the notch. I could see the faint rise of roadbed beyond, a darker bar in the whiteness. I stopped to pull air deep and to make sure the child was tucked, her face clear. Her lashes had melted and refrozen into tiny beads. I kissed the ice on her hat without thinking, a foolish benediction. The wolf stopped too. He stood just at the tree line, turned broadside, and watched the open. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. He held that spot like a man holds a door in a storm, body between us and whatever the world might throw. He stood like a sentry and guarded us to the end. The road cut rose under my boots like a promise kept, and beyond the notch the world opened into fields and rooftops softened by snow. The first house showed itself as a smudge of wood smoke against a pale sky, then another, then the line of the church steeple, gray on gray. I shifted the child higher inside my coat and felt the small weight of her settle, a fragile warmth against my chest. My legs shook with the kind of tired that starts in the bones. I told them to hold a little longer. At the bend, a pickup crawled toward us, tires whispering on packed snow. I stepped into the lane and lifted my arm. The truck braked hard enough to nose down, and the driver's door flew open before the engine quit. A man in a wool cap jumped out, then another from the passenger side, both running stiff with cold and panic. "Hey, you all right?" the first man called, the words white in the air between us. "I need help," I said, and my voice came out raw. I opened my coat, just enough to show the small face tucked inside. "She's cold but breathing." For a beat, everything went quiet. Then the second man made a sound I've only heard in barns and hospital hallways, something between a prayer and a curse. "Oh, God, that's the neighbor's girl. They've been out searching since morning." He was already shrugging out of his jacket, already clearing the front seat with one sweep of his arm. The first man fumbled the heater controls up to the last red mark, then held his hands like he could pull warmth out faster with his fingers. "Here, here," he said, shaking. "Get in. Let's get her inside." They didn't touch her until I told them how she was tucked. Then 4 big hands turned careful as a midwife's, and we slid her from my coat to the space between us on the bench seat, wrapped in my scarf and the man's jacket and anything else we could strip off. The heater coughed, then began to blow a tired breath that felt like summer after the bowl's still cold. "Hold on, baby," the driver said, his voice breaking on the last word. He put the truck in gear with a clack and we rolled, slow at first, then faster, the ruts holding us steady. The horn blared once, twice, a long call that could wake a town. Windows lit one by one as we passed. A door opened before we even stopped, and people spilled out into the street. Boots half-laced, coats thrown over pajamas, Wool hats dragged down so low they bent eyebrows. Voices braided into a single line. Is that her? Did you find her? Where? Is she breathing? Oh, Lord, thank you. It's the neighbor's girl, someone shouted. They lost her. They've been looking since dawn. A woman stumbled forward with a blanket in her arms, eyes wide and wet. That's our baby, she said, and then her voice failed and she pressed the blanket to her mouth like she was trying to hold in her heart. She reached for the child with hands that shook and then held steady, because mothers' hands do, even when the rest of the world is falling. We lowered the little body into that blanket, and a thin cry came, weak, broken, the sweetest sound I have ever heard. The street answered it with sobs and laughter and the kind of chatter people do when the worst thing doesn't happen. I stepped back, sudden light without her weight against me, and the emptiness hit so hard my knees almost buckled. Someone caught my elbow, steered me onto the step. Somebody else pushed a mug into my hand. I don't know what was in it. Tea, broth, mercy. It burned, and it made my hands work again. Voices swarmed around me. Where was she? How did you find her? God bless you. I tried to answer, but the words jammed up. My chest hurt with everything it was trying to let go of. I turned, because a piece of me was still in the trees, and looked back down the road toward the notch. He was there, at the edge of the timber, gray against the darker gray, a shape cut from silence. He stood just inside the shadow, not hiding, not coming forward, as if the line between forest and town was a rule he respected. He watched us. He watched the woman fold her child against her chest and rock like women have rocked since there were women. He watched my hands shake and the steam from the mug lift and vanish. I thought he would be gone now, finished with us, a story already turning into a legend by the time the sun went down. But he did not vanish. He held that place until I saw him, and when our eyes found each other across the snow, he lifted his head and let a sound go. It wasn't loud. It didn't split the air the way a long call can. It rose and fell soft as breath, a single line that carried from the dark of the trees to the light of the street and laid itself at our feet. It sounded like gratitude. The woman clutched her child and closed her eyes. The men went still, hats in hands without knowing why. The cry of the baby hiccuped and then steadied, as if the sound stitched something closed. I stood there with the mug warm in my palms and felt a heat in my chest that had nothing to do with the drink or the truck's heater or the blanket in the woman's arms. It was the heat that comes when a thing that should be impossible steps over into the world and refuses to be denied. The wolf thanked me for following him, and I thanked him for saving the child. He lowered his head, a small, sure motion, and then he turned sideways into the trees. No hurry, no drama, just a gray back slipping between trunks until there was only snow and shadow and the long breath of the winter woods. Voices rose again around me, questions tripping over thanks, plans spilling into the road. Call the nurse, get the stove hot, bring water, bring bread, bring everything. I set the empty mug on the rail and wiped my eyes with the heel of my hand. I told them what I could. They listened the way people listen when they are trying to make room in their minds for a world bigger than the one they woke up in. Then I looked once more at the place where the forest begins, and though it held only darkness and drift and the soft fall of snow, I could still hear that gentle line in the air, like a thread tying us to something old and good, and I knew I had not walked alone. Night pressed against the windows like a second blanket, and still I couldn't sleep. The house held its own winter sounds, the stove ticking as it cooled, the pipes clinking, the wind fingering the eaves. I lay there on my back with my hands crossed on my chest, like a man in a photograph, and watched the dark change shades. Every time I closed my eyes, snow moved behind them. Branches leaned. A small face looked up at me from inside my coat. My heart would stutter, and start again like a tractor in hard weather. I told myself to rest. I told myself the work was done, that she was in warm hands now, wrapped and checked and counted and held. I told myself the wolf had gone back to whatever life waits for a wolf when a human story ends. Wild things don't linger. They appear and disappear the way weather does. You thank them in your mind and you let them go. That's the way I've always kept the world in order. But when the clock in the kitchen coughed out the next hour and the house let go a long, low sigh, I heard him. It came thin and far, braided with wind, so faint I could have told myself I imagined it if I wanted to be the kind of man who unhears things. A single line, not proud or long, but steady enough to cross the road, the fields, the little river, and lay itself at my door. I sat up, slow, careful not to disturb the small drift of warmth I'd made under the blankets. The sound hung there for a breath, then let go. I felt it in my ribs after my ears lost it. I had seen the impossible. That thought didn't make me feel big. It made me small in the right way, like standing under a sky so open it presses you kindly to the ground. I went to the window and pushed the curtain with 2 fingers. The night was a deep, soft gray. No moon. The shed wore a slope of white. The fence lines were black stitches on a pale coat. Somewhere beyond that, a dark seam marked the woods. He was out there. He could have left the moment we reached the cut. He could have slipped away the way wild things do. No tracks a man can read for long, no sign that holds its shape when the next wind comes. Instead, he had stayed. He had held the edge until we were seen. He had waited for me to know I was not alone in what my eyes had taken in. The kettle on the stove clicked once as if to say it was still there, still ready if I needed it. I didn't. I needed only to stand in the dark and let the day run back through me. The bowl, the downed timber, the small blue hat, the weightless weight of a child against my chest, the crows shifting their grip on a branch and deciding against us, the low song he made that turned my shaking to something like courage, the way he stood at the last trees and watched the town gather itself to a cry and a blanket and a mother's hands. I had always thought I knew the size of things. I thought the forest was one size and I was another, and the line between us was clean. Tonight, the line had blurred, and in that blur, something good had stepped forward. I understood, standing there, that the wolf had saved more than a child. He had taken a hard knot inside me, the old knot that believes the world is only teeth and winter and the work of getting through, and he had loosened it with a look and a path and a sound. He had saved me from not believing, from the smallness that comes when a man decides miracles are for other people or for books. I thought I would forget it the way a person forgets a bad dream, the details slipping away at breakfast, the meaning softening until you can't hold it and it can't hold you. But every night since, I hear that howl, sometimes thin as thread, sometimes only in the memory of my ribs, and I know it is not a dream. It has become a kind of heartbeat that doesn't belong to blood. I'll be stacking wood or tying a boot or loosening a knot in a rope, and the sound will move through me, and I'll stand still until it passes. It never asks anything. It only reminds. It says, "You saw what you saw. Don't make it smaller." In the days that followed, people told the story back to me with their hands moving and their eyes bright. They added pieces I didn't have. Who first noticed the open gate, how the prints near the lane were red, which neighbor remembered the blue hat, who lit the lamps, who boiled the water, who called who. They told me how the child woke and took a little milk and slept and warmed, how her fingers went from stone to flesh and back to stone and then to flesh again. I nodded and thanked them and felt the knot in me loosening a little more each time. Sometimes, in the telling, they left the wolf out, not to be cruel, but because it was easier on the mind. Sometimes they put him in, but gave him edges that fit their own fears or hopes. I listened and kept my own peace quiet inside me, the way you hold a coal long enough to light the next fire. When it was my turn, I said only what was true. A wolf called me, and I followed. He led me to a child who needed hands. He stood watch until we were safe. That is all, and that is everything. If your heart is pausing right now, you understand what I'm saying. If you believe the world is wider than the lines we draw, stay with these stories. Nature tells the truth. If you feel that in your bones, subscribe. There's more of the real thing here, and it matters. I went back to bed and lay on my side with my hand flat on the blankets over my chest, feeling for the echo of that call. It was there, not as sound, but as a certainty that steadied me. I thought of his eyes at the tree line, not wildfire, but something older, the kind of knowing that doesn't need words. I closed my eyes and saw snow again, but now it didn't press on me. It covered things the way kindness covers mistakes. Nature is wiser than we are. Animals remember kindness. I say it out loud sometimes now, to hear how it fits in my mouth. It fits fine. It fits like a truth I should have learned earlier, and am grateful to know at last. And when the wind runs the right way, and the night leans close, I hear him, far but near, a single line across the dark, and I answer in the quiet of my chest, I hear you, I won't forget. Spring had put a thin skin on the world by the time I went back, the kind of spring our place knows, more promise than fact. Patches of ground opened like dark eyes in the snow. Water talked under ice and sometimes shouldered free to flash along the ditch. The birch wore a hint of green if you knew where to look, and the spruce kept their winter shape as if to remind the land not to get ahead of itself. I parked at the same turnout and cut the engine. The silence came down fast, the way it does when the last mechanical sound leaves a place that belongs to wind and birds. I told myself I was there to check the trail, to see what the winter had broken and what it had spared, to find that old cut and walk it end to end. That was the story I brought so I wouldn't have to say the real one out loud. I had come back to the bowl, to the downed timber, to the place where a wolf had turned my life like a page. The first steps were familiar. The crust gave and held and gave again. The same snag pointed like a crooked finger. The same rock wore its lichen like an old bruise. I found the dip of the game trail without looking for it. My body remembered what my mind pretended to forget. Farther in, the snow went soft, and then there it was. A line written fresh across the white, a neat, narrow story of 4 feet moving with purpose. Wolf, not one set, but several, weaving and straightening again, the way a family moves through tight trees, close, separate, together, apart. I crouched, put my glove beside a print, and felt the same old shake in my hands. The edges were clean. The ice at the bottom still held a shine. They had passed here in the gray before dawn, or the blue after it. My breath lifted and spread like a veil. I didn't try to look for more than I could see. I followed the line because that is what you do when the land gives you a sentence worth reading. It angled toward the rise. The wind combed the tops of the spruce and made that long sound that can empty your head if you let it. I let it. At the crest I stopped and set my palm flat on the ground where the winter had worn it bare. The dirt was cold and dry. It smelled like iron and pine and the old clean quiet that lives under snow. I closed my eyes and saw the gray back slipping away into trees. I saw the look he gave me at the last, not wildfire, but something older, something that knew more than I did about the rules of being alive. I had spent months trying to fit that look into the boxes I keep for animals and weather and luck. Every time I thought I had done it, the memory pushed back, not with argument, but with weight. Standing there, palm on the ground, the truth came through as simple as breath. It was not an accident. He did not stumble on a man and drag him into a story that had nothing to do with either of them. He chose. He stayed. He asked, and I answered, and because of that, a small life was carried out of winter. The bowl lay quieter now. The timber had shifted under late snows and freed itself of some burdens. The drifts had slumped and glazed. I took the slope careful, the way I had then, though my arms carried only air this time. In the low place, the air felt thicker, like a church where the door has been shut a long time and the prayers have settled into the wood. I found the storm-down spruce and the space beside it where my knees had broken the crust. I saw my hands digging, clumsy and fast. I saw a blue hat stiff with frost and the smallest face I've ever trusted myself to touch. "Thank you," I said, because there was no one and there was everyone to thank. The words came quiet and truer than most of what I say in a year. I didn't know who I was speaking to. Wolf, winter, God, the part of myself that hadn't given up, and it didn't matter. Gratitude doesn't care about addresses. The wind turned, and I lifted my head. At first it was only the sound of water under ice somewhere far off, the low clink of branch on branch as the trees forgot a little of their stiffness. Then, from beyond the bowl, from the long line of the ridge, a single note unrolled. Not loud, not the bright, high ribbon of a pack yarn, a measured line that laid itself across the land and stopped the little chatter in the back of my skull. I stood with my mouth open like a child and let it go through me. I cried. Not the hot kind you fight and hide, but the clean kind that comes when you put down what you've been carrying. It surprised me how quietly it happened. No sob, no wrench, just water from the eyes and breath going in and out while the sound held the world in place. I thought of the woman's hands, steady under the blanket. I thought of the men with their hats in their hands, without knowing why. I thought of the small weight against my chest and the breath that caught and then continued. The land seemed to get bigger and closer at once, the way it does at dusk when the last light leans on everything at the same time. I had always said I feared wolves. It was a plain thing to say and easy to defend. Teeth, winter, hunger. The arithmetic writes itself. Standing there under that thin spring sky, I understood what I had really feared, being wrong about the world. I had kept my distances tidy, man here, wild there, luck on one side, mercy on the other. That day in the bowl, a gray animal had stepped across my tidy lines and asked me to follow him to a place where a child needed heat, and I had followed, and the world had not fallen apart. It had come together. I walked the rest of the way to the cut. The snow was patchy where the wind has a habit of making ground early. Old grass lay flat and yellow, and a strip of mud showed where the sun had worked harder than the shade. At the edge of the trees I stopped because I knew I had stopped here before, with my heart hammering, and a truck coming, and hands reaching, and a cry rising out of a blanket like a bird too small for its own song. The sky then had been iron. The sky now was tin warmed by the idea of summer. Neither mattered much to the fact of the place. A print pressed the rim of the cut, a big foot, the same neat narrow line, another beside it, smaller, another angled across, not careful, more a lope than a line. I stood with my boots in the old track of the road and counted the spaces between them and felt a strange joy that had no name I have heard. Family, maybe, or simply enough. The howl came again, farther, sweeter. It lifted the hair on my arms and eased something in my chest at the same time. I laughed because both things can be true in a good world. I wiped my face with the back of my glove and spoke the sentence I had been holding like a live coal for months. This sort of thing doesn't happen, but I saw it. Saying it didn't make it smaller. It made it right. The land didn't argue. The trees didn't lean closer to eavesdrop. The sky stayed what it was. I stood there in boots older than most of the trucks at the store and let myself be a man in a place where the lines are not as sharp as I once believed, and it felt like the right size for a life. I have spent most of my years believing that fear is a good map. Sometimes it is. Often it is only a fence that keeps you from seeing what's on the other side. I had feared wolves because it is easy to fear a thing with teeth and a walk made for winter. I had not guessed a wolf could carry a different edge, the edge that cuts the rope around a small knot in a man's chest and lets his heart move in him the way it was built to move. I have been afraid of wolves all my life, but that wolf showed me animals can do more than we think. I don't trust myself, but I was there. I heard his howl, and he saved a child. I stood until the sound thinned and went, not because it was finished, but because it had done its work. On the way back, I put my palm on the same trees, not to steady myself, but to say a kind of hello. The snow took my prints and began to soften them, even as I made them. Good. Let the land heal over what I had disturbed. The truth would hold without my marks. At the turnout, I put the truck in gear and rolled slow over the ruts. When the road bent, I looked once more toward the ridge and felt that old, steady line through my ribs, the one that isn't sound anymore, but memory doing what memory was made to do. I spoke out loud, because some things you should hear yourself say. Nature is wiser than we are. Animals remember kindness. If your heart is full of reverence right now, write, nature is wiser than us. If you have met a miracle in the wild, write, animals remember kindness. If you believe there is a bond between us and them, write, we are not alone in this world.